Good morning and welcome back to part 2 of last week's video of David Blakely. But today I'm in a churchyard of St Mary the Virgin Church in Amersham, and today we're here to see his killer, Ruth Ellis. Now, unfortunately, Ruth Ellis's headstone was destroyed, as you are going to hear soon, by her son. And a very nice gentleman actually took it upon himself at his own expense to replace it. But unfortunately, someone has half-inched that as well. So all that we're going to see today is maybe a few trinkets that people have left by, but her headstone is basically just a little white stake poking out the ground. So don't expect too much. I will try and show you a little bit of footage of the replacement headstone if I can, and maybe a photo of the original.
So we're here today to put a stone down on Ruth Ellis's grave. Her maiden name is Hornby, and that's what was on the original headstone.
But as far as visiting her final resting place, all we are going to see today is a little white stake poking out of the ground. But anyway, I'm going to show you around this extension of the churchyard, because the church is over probably about 200-300 yards away from me at the moment. As soon as I get a chance to, I'll give a little bit of film of that. But I'll show you around this extended part of the churchyard while I'll tell you a little bit about Ruth Ellis.
Ruth Ellis was born Ruth Nielsen in Rhyl, Denbighshire, Wales on 9th of October 1926, the fifth of 6 children. She moved to Basingstoke, Hampshire, England with her family during her childhood. Her mother, Bertha Goethals, was a Belgian war refugee. Her father, Arthur Hornby, was a cellist from Manchester. In 1928, when Ruth was aged 2, Arthur's twin brother Charles was killed when his bicycle collided with a steam wagon. According to Muriel, Arthur became physically and sexually abusive shortly after his brother's death, with Bertha being aware of the abuse but taking no action. The sexual abuse eventually resulted in Muriel conceiving a child by her father at age 14, which led to Arthur being questioned and ultimately released by police. The child, a son, was brought up as a sibling to the other children. Arthur turned his attention towards Ruth after Muriel reached puberty, but Ruth continually resisted the abuse. Ruth briefly attended Fairfield Senior Girls' School in Basingstoke, leaving when she was aged 14. She found work as an usherette at a cinema in Reading, Berkshire. Shortly afterwards, in 1940, Arthur moved to London. The following year, while her older brother Julian was on leave from service in the Royal Navy, Ruth befriended his girlfriend Edna Turvey, who introduced her to what Muriel later called the fast life. Ruth and Edna eventually moved to London and lodged with Ruth's father. He continued his abuse of Ruth while engaging in an affair with Edna, which ended when Bertha made an unannounced visit and caught the pair in bed. Bertha herself moved to London soon afterwards. By the end of the 1940s, Ruth had become a nightclub hostess in Hampstead through nude modelling work, which paid significantly more than her previous jobs. Maurice Conley, her manager at the Court Club in Duke Street, blackmailed his hostess employees into sleeping with him. On 8th of November 1950, Ruth married 41-year-old George Johnson Ellis, a divorced dentist with 2 sons, at a register office in Tunbridge, Kent. A regular customer at the Court Club, George was a violent and possessive alcoholic who became convinced that his new wife was having an affair. Ruth left him several times but always returned. When she gave birth to a daughter, Georgina, in 1951, George refused to acknowledge paternity. They separated shortly afterwards and later divorced. In 1951, while she had been 4 months pregnant, Ruth appeared uncredited as a beauty queen in the Rank film Lady Godiva Rides Again. She returned to prostitution following a divorce from Ellis, having moved into her parents' residence with her daughter. In 1953, Ruth became the manager of the Little Club, a nightclub in Knightsbridge. At this time, she was lavished with expensive gifts by admirers and had a number of celebrity friends. Ellis met David Blakely, 3 years her junior, through racing driver Mike Hawthorne. Blakely was a former public schoolboy who was educated at Shrewsbury School and Sandhurst, but was also a hard-drinking racer. Within weeks, he moved into Ruth's flat above the club, despite being engaged to another woman, Mary Dawson. Ruth then began seeing Desmond Cusson, a former Royal Air Force pilot who had flown Lancaster bombers during the Second World War, and who had taken up accountancy after leaving the service. He was appointed a director of the family business Cusson & Co., a wholesale and retail tobacconist with outlets in London and South Wales. Ruth eventually moved in with Cusson at 20 Goodwood Court, Devonshire Street, north of Oxford Street. On Easter Sunday, 10th of April 1955, Ruth took a taxi from Cusson's home to a second-floor flat at 29 Tanser Road, Hampstead, the home of Anthony and Carol Findlater, where she suspected Blakely might be. As she arrived, Blakely's car drove off, so she paid off the taxi driver and walked a quarter of a mile to the Magdala, a pub in South Hill Park, where she found Blakely's car parked outside. At around 9:30 p.m, Blakely and his friend Clive Gunnell emerged. Blakely passed Ruth waiting on the pavement when she stepped out of the doorway of Henshaw's, a newsagent next to the Magdala. As Blakely searched for the keys to his car, Ruth took a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson Victory model revolver from her handbag and fired 5 shots at Blakely. The first shot missed. Ruth pursued Blakely as he started to run around the car, firing a second shot which caused him to collapse onto the pavement. She then stood over him and fired 3 more bullets, with one fired less than half an inch from his back, leaving powder burns on his skin. Ruth was seen to stand over Blakely as she repeatedly tried to fire the revolver's 6th shot, finally firing it into the ground. This bullet ricocheted off the road and injured Gladys Yule, a bystander who lost the use of her right thumb. Ruth, in apparent shock, asked Gunnell, "Will you call the police, Clive?" She was arrested immediately by an off-duty policeman who heard her say, "I am guilty, I'm a little confused." Blakely's body was taken to hospital with multiple fatal wounds to the intestines, liver, lung, aorta and trachea. Originally taken in as evidence, the revolver is now in the Metropolitan Police's Crime Museum. At Hampstead Police Station, Ruth appeared to be calm and not obviously under the influence of drink or drugs. She made her first appearance at the Magistrates' Court on 11th of April 1955 and was ordered to be held on remand. On 20th of June 1955, Ruth appeared in the No. 1 Court at the Old Bailey, London, before Mr. Justice Havers. The only question put to Ruth by prosecutor Christmas Humphreys was, "When you fired the revolver at close range into the body of David Blakely, what did you intend to do?" Her answer, "It was obvious when I shot him I intended to kill him." This reply guaranteed a guilty verdict and the mandatory death sentence. The jury took 20 minutes to convict her. Just before 9 a.m. on the 13th of July 1955, the hangman, Albert Pierpoint, and his assistant entered her cell and took her to the adjacent execution room where she was hanged. As was customary in British executions, Ruth was buried in an unmarked grave within the walls of Holloway Prison. In the early 1970s, the remains of executed women were exhumed for reburial elsewhere. In Ellis's case, directed by her next of kin, her son Andy, her remains were reburied in the churchyard of St Mary's Church in Amersham, Buckinghamshire, some 3 miles away from where Blakely was buried. Her headstone was inscribed, Ruth Hornby, 1926-1955. Andy destroyed the headstone shortly before he committed suicide in 1982.
Right, well that's all I got on Ruth Ellis. The big question I suppose everyone's asking is, do you think she should have been hanged? Now my opinion on it is, I think she should have got whatever a man would have got for doing the same crime. And I think a man would have been hanged. But with the way he treated her and that taken into consideration, I think maybe life imprisonment would have been a more suitable sentence. Anyway, I have a final resting place just in front of me, so I shall spin you around and we'll go and have a look at it together. Well, as I warned you at the beginning of this video, it is only literally a white stake poking out the ground, and it's tucked away in a very quiet corner of the churchyard, out of the way. But here it is. This is a final resting place of Ruth Ellis. Someone so famous, nothing to mark her final resting place because someone stole the replacement headstone that someone put in there at their own expense. It's terrible. But there you have it. That was the final resting place of Ruth Ellis, the killer of David Blakely, who featured in last week's video. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I mean, it's an absolutely beautiful place. It's very quiet, apart from the high street is literally a few hundred yards to my right. Every now and then you can hear a loud car engine, but you get the bird song and all that you normally get in these places. It's absolutely beautiful. But as I say, that's the final resting place of Ruth Ellis. So I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. It does help the channel grow. And if you haven't already, then maybe you should consider subscribing if you like the content. And if you do subscribe, then don't forget to hit that notification bell. That way you will be notified every time I upload a new video. Well, anyway, that's it from St Mary the Virgin Church in Amersham. I'll see you on the next one. So bye-bye for now.
During those 3 weeks, while public controversy mounted, one man had a terrible decision to make, Home Secretary William Lloyd George. As he went about his public duties, he had to decide whether or not to write the grim words, "The law must take its course." But in the end, he had no choice. As the law stands, and as precedent dictates, Ruth Ellis had to die.